The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
Metroid. Undoubtedly one of the most influential games of all time, basically co-creating an entire genre alongside Castlevania, Symphony of the Night. If you play video games and are watching this video, you've inevitably run across it at some point in your life. Due to the recent announcement of the 5th core entry into the series, Metroid Dread, I was in the mood to replay every game in the series in chronological order. I was expecting this to be a simple marathon, but quickly found myself appreciating it for being simultaneously one of the most varied and misunderstood but also consistent series in the entire medium. So let me take you on a journey to understand Metroid. Before we get started, let's set some rules as to what classifies as a real Metroid game as a baseline for the games we'll be looking at today. 3 things mostly. 1. It has to primarily involve traversing a wide variety of locales. 2. It must primarily have been developed as a single-player experience. And 3. The focus must not lie in the combat, but in the exploration. With this we can rule out Prime Hunters, Prime Pinball, Other M, and Prime Federation Force, leaving us with a total of 9 games. Though I will be talking about AM2R as well, so that we can round it up to a nice 10. On top of this, I'll also be avoiding spoilers for later areas as much as possible, as most of the core ideas present throughout the entire game can be seen throughout the first 2 areas of said games. With that out of the way, let's get started. The original Metroid is, to put it bluntly, a relic of its era. You can see the seeds of creating a game about freely exploring an alien planet being sown, but the limitations at the time simply prevented the team from being able to fully realize their ideas, leading to a lot of repeated rooms, an issue that plagues the entire game, making it near impossible to properly know your location at any given time unless you're using an outside map. Despite that though, this game still forms the basis of all things one associates with Metroid. Bombing floors for progression, finding upgrades for your shot, armor and missiles, etc. It's just a shame that the NES simply wasn't powerful enough to properly capture the developer's vision. You can see at several points that there were clear attempts made at distinguishing the copy-pasted rooms from one another by color-coding them. However, due to the NES's very limited color palette, this too starts falling apart rather quickly. I find the most fascinating part of this game to be the way it is structured, featuring both claustrophobic and incredibly linear pathways, as well as open fields that let you choose the way you reach your goal, something that future games would use to either lean on one or the other. It also allows you to peep your head into future areas, giving you a taste of what to expect, before sending you back to get upgrades until you're properly able to progress. An incredibly effective way of rewarding exploration. This game truly birthed the Metroidvania genre we know and love today. Despite its many flaws, the sense of progression is most definitely there, and the idea of returning to prior areas with new upgrades is already present. So that brings us to calling this game Metroid 2 is kind of a misrepresentation of what it actually is. It's more like Metroid in half. The shift from NES to Game Boy meant 2 things. 1. They had to change the game's fundamental design to accommodate for the system's portable nature. 2. The sprites needed to be big enough to accommodate for the small screen size, meaning the map had to be designed around the very small visible space. This is why the game focuses squarely on the original's claustrophobic aspects. The entire map is one massive interconnected cave system, and your main goal is to search out and eliminate every single Metroid in the current area. You can't progress without doing that, and you never have to return to any previously visited area to get new upgrades to progress. It's an incredibly streamlined experience that frankly plays like shit. However, I am able to respect it because it does what it tries to do very well. You're never able to branch off the beaten path, leading to a lot of very close-cornered encounters with the Metroids. The massive sprites reinforce this idea of making their fights feel personal. Even the music reinforces this idea of isolation. Oftentimes it will just consist of individual bleeps and bloops with massive pauses between each one, and sometimes it just cuts out completely, leaving you alone to ponder if there may just be a Metroid waiting to assault you in the next room. Just like the first game, it really hasn't aged the best and is frankly not a good game. However, it knows exactly what it is and isn't, and that's why I can safely say that this is my favorite version of Metroid 2. We'll get to this later, but for now it's time for... While Return of Samus leaned heavily into the original's more claustrophobic nature, Super goes into the opposite direction and focuses more on the open-ended sections. The game is chock full of hidden nooks and crannies, and you can very easily sequence break the game if you're good enough. This to me is part of the appeal of Metroid, and also showcases a major problem with the genre as a whole. A common misconception I see on the internet is that Metroidvanias should be open-ended in their nature. I don't think that's true. The best games in the genre all feature linear pathways and strict orders you have to follow from start to finish. But they allow you to deviate from the set path, explore, and find new things which you can in turn use to find even more things. So while your destination is always the same, the path you take constantly changes and varies from person to person. Some might get to Norfair early, while others decide to say fuck it and sequence break their way to the spaceship. However, in the latter half, the game starts to open up even more, and specifically around Meridia, the map stops being a sandbox divided into several sub-areas and starts becoming a messy maze that doesn't know how to properly guide you through it, which leads to a lot of running in circles and opening up the map every 2 minutes like a maniac, just to make sure you're on the right path. Despite all that, Super Metroid is still the freedom of Metroid in its purest form, a complete sense of freedom that truly defines the Metroidvania genre, and total control over the pace of the game that would be followed by Metroid Fusion is my favorite game in the series. It's not a good Metroid game, and it barely even qualifies as a Metroidvania game. And that's the point. This is the first and so far only game in the series to interconnect its story and its gameplay. Not through the introduction of new mechanics, but by removing them and making you vulnerable. Metroid Fusion is the low point of Samus' life as a bounty hunter. The game opens with her losing what is essentially her humanity, by making her body part Metroid and part X on top of the prior Chozo DNA that she's had since childhood. Her power suit is gone, and more importantly, her control over the situation, and by extension the players, is also gone. The game does an amazing job of making you feel at the mercy of your environments by having Samus only able to do what she's told to. You can no longer sequence break, your wall jump has essentially been made useless, and every time you enter a new area you're forced to sit down and let an AI tell you what to do. You have as little say in the matter as Samus does, and that is a massive turn off for a lot of people. And I can't blame them for disliking the change in direction. This lack of control is further exemplified through the introduction of SAX. It has control. It has your suit. It has everything that you have lost, and not only can it essentially sequence break the game, it does. At several points in the game you will run across pathways that it has destroyed and thus bypassed. This is Super Metroid Samus at the most powerful state, and every time you encounter it, you have no chance of putting up a fight. You'll probably die in a handful of hits, and in the earlier encounters, it can even freeze you solid. You are entirely at its mercy, so hearing its footsteps once the music cuts out is incredibly tense. This is why I personally believe that Fusion does better than any other Metroid what it sets out to do. It is the build-up to what is soon to become Metroid 5. But before we would ever get to that point, we still have to get through. For this part, I'm going to be ruling Prime 1 and 2 into one, as while they do have many differences, they are basically the exact same in their design philosophy. When turning Metroid into a first-person shooter, the team over at Retro Studios had two options. Either sacrifice the speed and agility of the main series in favor of exploration, or vice versa. Retro Studios chose the former, and to their credit, Prime 1 and 2 are easily the most open games in the series. The third dimension allows for so many nooks and crannies to explore, and if you ask me, maybe even too many. I'd like to clarify that I genuinely love these games almost as much as the 2D entries. However, while they do feature a near overwhelming amount of freedom, they also lack a major aspect of what made these games so fascinating to begin with: control. As I explained earlier, control in a Metroid game means the ability to master its mechanics from the very beginning, allowing you to become powerful incredibly quickly and letting you beat the game in nearly an hour. That is the beauty of Metroid. And Prime just doesn't really do that? Let me explain. The game is incredibly slow paced due to Samus's reduced movement speed. Abilities like the speed booster, the run, or the wall jump no longer exist, instead having been replaced by the return of the grappling beam and a simple double jump. As stated earlier, the game's focus lies squarely on the exploration, and thus the game is built around a lot of interesting environments and locales. Every area in the game is full of cool ass collectibles and so many new things to discover, and that's where the problems start. So the Prime games introduced this new mechanic called the scan visor, and to get 100% in this game, you have to scan every single little thing. From doors to floors to walls to balls, you have to scan them all, and God forbid you miss one of them, because then you may as well start over. At least if you want that sweet 100% completion ending. Another major issue is that returning to older areas to get new upgrades is always a massive slog because of how slow the game is. But all of this wouldn't be so bad if the game was shorter. However, Metroid Prime 1 and 2 are considerably longer than any other game in the series, and will still take you quite a considerable amount of time to do the one thing that literally everyone and their mother agrees upon being actually shit: the artifact hunts. Oh my god, they are a pain in the ass to find. It's especially bad in 2, but still really damn annoying in 1. You can tell that the team really wanted you to explore every tiny crevice that they could shove into these GameCube games, but sometimes enough is enough. And that is the reason why I tend to generally avoid replaying these two compared to all the others. So while Retro Studios was busy reimagining the series as an FPS, the main team took the only logical course of action. I love this game. Right off the gate, I just want to clarify something. While Fusion is my favorite one, Zero Mission is easily the best one. It's just too well designed to not be. Everything about this game is so meticulously refined. Samus has never controlled better. Every room serves a purpose. Every upgrade vastly expands your options of traversal, and there are so many tiny nooks and crannies to find, but you'll always perfectly know what to do. By far the best thing about this game is how it guides you along, by giving you a general idea of where you need to go after finding major Chozo statues. Every time you enter a new area, you have to keep going and get a specific upgrade, else the game won't let you get back. Along the way to that upgrade, you see several areas you still don't have access to, but everything is perfectly marked and color-coded. When you then finally get that upgrade, the game immediately forces you to use it, showing you exactly how it works and what it does. And because just minutes ago you saw mechanisms that looked exactly like the one you just operated, it immediately clicks in your head and you instantly know where you can go and what you can do. Once the game asks you to retract your steps, you have so many possibilities. Super Metroid did the same thing in the earlier half, but kinda falls apart once you reach Meridia, as I mentioned earlier. But here it's phenomenally designed, and it stays that way from start to finish. Every bombable floor tile, every hidden pathway, every minor sequence break subtly pulls attention to itself so well that you'd practically have to try to get lost. Hell, the map is barely even needed. I'd easily argue that this game is the peak of the genre, as it simply does nothing wrong. It's incredibly enjoyable from start to finish, has airtight and foolproof map design, can be beaten in a single sitting even when 100%ing it, and it's just a blast to play every time. Well, there is one thing. The bosses are easily the worst in the series, next only to the original Metroid, and that's a damn shame. While in every other game they mostly just serve as a means to show how powerful you've gotten, as well as being big old cool looking punching bags, with the occasional gimmick here and there, here they're just so freaking annoying. Half of them are pathetically easy and go down within seconds, while the other half are disgusting damage sponges that refuse to die and required to play an annoying ass bullet hell or sit down and wait for them to finish their crappy repeated attack pattern and wait. It's annoying as hell and serves no purpose other than wasting your time. But I guess there's got to be something to complain about. No game is perfect after all. It's really heartbreaking to see that we would never see a main 2D Metroid game again after this, because, hell, they basically perfected the formula. Well, I guess we wouldn't get one until now, that is, but before we can get there, we first need to talk about... Let me clarify two things up front. 1. Is Prime 3 a good Metroid Prime game? No. 2. Is Prime 3 even a good Metroid game in general? Also no. This game takes very heavy inspiration from Fusion as opposed to 1 and 2 taking from Super. The focus is very clearly set on smaller individual areas to traverse as well as telling a story. There is barely anything to explore anymore compared to the first two games, and instead you get several cutscenes every 2 minutes. On top of that, the game also tries to repeat the plot point of Samus losing control over situations due to her being infected with Phazon, but it never amounts to anything gameplay-wise aside from you getting a temporary hyper mode in exchange for a health tank, which is admittedly pretty damn cool. But all of its consequences are only ever used in the cutscenes. God, there is so many scripted sequences and cutscenes. It's by far the shortest of the trilogy and doesn't force you to go on a shitty MacGuffin hunt, which is why I vastly prefer playing it over the others. But 3 hours of its runtime are just watching these cutscenes and these characters talking. It's hard to say whether the team just didn't know what to do with the games anymore or just really wanted to tell this cool story they had planned since 2, but didn't know how to properly introduce into the game. Either way, the end result is a product that feels so tonally disconnected from every other game in the series with the exception of Other M. And, well, Metroid has never been a series about telling, but rather showing you the stories unfold with nary a line of dialogue spoken. So having these long and often drawn out conversations that go on for way longer than they should is just jarring. After this game we'd only see Other M, which notoriously killed the franchise for 5 years. And then they made Federation Force, which made people open up petitions to get it cancelled. And then, just 1 year later, we got... This one hurts, man. I wanted to like this game, I really did. I'm going to be putting AM2R and Samus Returns together, as I believe the fundamental idea behind both of them to be the same. However, they do both fall short in different areas. That idea being to turn Metroid 2 into something more closely resembling Super Metroid. And this to me proves a fundamental misunderstanding of why the game was the way it was to begin with. As I mentioned earlier in part 2, the ideas behind Metroid 2 were those of keeping every encounter close-cornered and personal, as well as letting you play everything in short bursts. It wasn't the fastest game in the world, but it got the job done. AM2R tries to introduce elements from Super Metroid and Zero Mission and makes it a lot more open by letting you sequence break and explore a lot more thanks to adding in things like the wall jump and the speed booster. However, it ruins itself by not changing the way progression is handled. The game still feels closed in because you simply cannot progress without having killed all the Metroids in the area. Except that now you have a reason to go back to prior areas to get some upgrades here and there. The larger screen size and smaller sprites also make fighting the Metroids feel much less personal and impactful, and more like an annoyance that you need to take care of before being able to just continue playing the game proper. Whereas in the original, the fights were the rewards itself, breaking up the long segments of walking from point A to point B. Samus Returns' biggest problem, on the other hand, is its speed. This game loves to waste your time. The melee attacks, 360-degree aiming, and even the new boss force you to stand still to attack, instantly killing any sense of flow that you had just built up. Even the confrontations with the Metroids were made worse, as some of them can now just leave the arena and then you have to go after them. And that's really fucking annoying. The sense of dread and isolation was also completely lost in both of these remakes due to their introduction of colorful new environments and music. I wanted these games to be good, man. Both of them, I really did. And while AM2R is better than Samus Returns in some ways, and Samus Returns is better in others, neither of them understands what the original Metroid 2 was truly all about. Remaking it into a more Super Metroid-like game would require a complete restructuring of the game's progression, and neither of them does that. And after all that, we are now left with Now, I don't possess some kind of early access copy of Metroid Dread. However, I believe that the gameplay we've been shown thus far shows us a rather fundamental idea for the game. Melee moves can now be executed while running. Everything is fast and frantic. The enemies are a fully realized version of SAX and its chaser system, and the core theme is encapsulated perfectly in the word Dread. With this, I believe we can determine that the game will be a mix of both Super Metroid and Fusion, pitting Samus against an impossible threat. In a way, Fusion was a build-up to a payoff we had never gotten. Now we are finally getting that payoff, and I genuinely can't wait to see how it ends up. Will it be good? Will it be bad? I don't know, but you can bet your ass I'll be there to see it. Cheers.